Worst job ever. You think your job is bad? Try this. You walk into a room, everyone avoids eye contact. There's a dead body in the middle, and your boss hands you bread and beer on the corpse, and then you eat it. Congratulations, you're now history's most socially awkward catering service, the Sin Eater. In the 17th century, in parts of Britain and Wales, people believed that when someone died, their sins didn't just disappear. Nope. Those bad vibes needed somewhere to go. And who better to dump them on than a complete social outcast? Enter the Sin Eater, a poor soul paid in crumbs and curses to consume the dead sins. Literally. It's not like this was a glamorous gig. You didn't get a uniform, a cool title, or even a seat at the village tavern. What you got was a one-way ticket to being the most hated person in town. Imagine walking through the market and people physically stepping away from you as if you were carrying the plague, because in their minds, you kind of were. Spiritually, at least. Here's how it worked. The family of the deceased would place a piece of bread and a cup of ale, sometimes wine, directly on the chest of the body. The bread was meant to absorb the sins of the dead, like some kind of supernatural sponge. The ale was, well, maybe to wash the sins down. The Sin Eater would come in, mumble some prayers, probably the same ones every time, then eat and drink, symbolically transferring every moral crime, dirty secret, and spiritual stain into himself. It wasn't just the act that was disturbing, it was the atmosphere. Picture it, a low-roofed cottage, stone walls cold to the touch, air thick with the smell of tallow candles and herbs. The only sound is the faint crackle of a fire and the uneven breathing of the grieving family. And there you are, the outsider, stepping forward to break the silence. With chewing. Sounds simple, right? Wrong. Because after that, you weren't just a guy who did a weird job. You were spiritually contaminated. People genuinely believed you carried those sins around inside you forever. You were a walking landfill of other people's guilt. Nobody wanted to shake your hand. Nobody wanted you near their children. You weren't invited to parties, weddings, or even funerals you weren't working at. And if, by some miracle, you found love, good luck convincing someone to marry the human trash bin of sins. But here's the kicker. Being shunned was the least of your problems. Sin eaters were usually already at rock bottom. Beggars, wanderers, people who'd fallen completely out of the social structure. The job was almost always forced on those with no other means of survival. And once you did it once, you were marked for life. It wasn't a side hustle you could drop when you found better work. The ritual made you unclean in the eyes of the community. Your name became a warning. People whispered it to their children at night. Behave, or the Sin Eater will come for you. And if you died, guess what? No one wanted to eat your sins. You went to the grave as spiritually bloated as you were physically hungry. Still, even ghosts need to eat. And this is where the deal gets truly insulting. Your pay? A piece of bread, a cup of beer, maybe a few coins if the family was generous. No health plan, no retirement, no thank you for your service plaque. And yet, people kept doing it, not because they wanted to, but because there was literally nothing else. Imagine taking the worst gig on Fiverr, but instead of bad reviews, you get eternal damnation. And speaking of damnation, the church had opinions. Here's the wild part. The church officially hated the practice. They called it superstition, even heresy. But unofficially, they looked the other way. Why? Because the ritual kept grieving families happy, and happy families meant less trouble. Priests didn't want to be the ones to remove sins outside of confession, so they let the so-called unholy handle it. Sin eaters became the spiritual janitors of society, invisible until something needed cleaning, then quickly forgotten. Some villages even had their favorite sin eater, not because they liked him, but because he was reliable. Word would spread. Old Thomas eats without a word, does the job quick, doesn't ask questions. And if you think Yelp reviews are bad, imagine the gossip network of a 17th century village. One slip-up, one dropped crumb, one botched prayer, and your reputation was done. The ritual itself was strangely intimate and awkward. Picture it again. The family standing in silence, watching as you lean over their loved one, take the bread, and chew slowly while every eye is locked on you. Nobody talks. Nobody thanks you. They just wait. And then, when you're done, they look relieved, but also disgusted. You've done them a favor, and they still hate you for it. There were rules too. The sin eater had to eat every last crumb and drink every drop, no matter how stale or bitter. Skipping anything meant the ritual was incomplete, and the dead might still be burdened. In some places, the sin eater had to say the person's name aloud, as if announcing to the world, "I take this one's sins upon myself." You think your morning meeting is awkward? Try doing that in front of the whole village. Some sin eaters claimed they could feel the weight of the sins settling in, as if a cold shadow crawled into their chest. Others said they would get sick for days after a ritual, blaming the spiritual contamination. There are even stories of sin eaters who believed the sins were so strong they could attract evil spirits, forcing them to sleep with charms and amulets for protection. And yet, when a family's grief turned to desperation, they called for the sin eater anyway. By the 19th century, the practice was starting to fade. Science was replacing superstition, and people began to suspect that bread and beer weren't exactly a cosmic washing machine for the soul. The last recorded sin eater is believed to have died in the early 1900s, buried quietly with no one to take his sins. How ironic is that? The man who ate hundreds of souls went to the afterlife alone. Today, the story survives mostly in folklore and horror fiction, but it still hits a nerve because the idea is timeless. Someone taking on the worst parts of humanity for a price so small it's almost insulting. We see echoes of it in modern jobs, the ones where you take all the blame, absorb all the stress, and still get paid next to nothing. So next time you think your job is bad, remember the poor soul who sat beside the dead, eating bread soaked in fear and superstition. Worst job ever. If you think this was bad, wait until you see the next one. Click here, and trust me, your job will feel like a vacation.